It's
Oh, yeah. Can I mute myself?
We're good. We're good. All right. We are live, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. And welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm so excited about this one. We have a great webinar on tap. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded. So if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your question and answer tab on your interface and submit your question. And we're going to ask questions throughout the entire webinar. So please, please, please get your questions in if you've got one. Also, we have a very interactive chat feature here on the interface, so we encourage you to chat us your suggestions, questions, comments, whatever you want to send over to us. We'll be more than happy to get it, and we will chat you back, and we might even integrate it into the conversation. And then finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. And hopefully my camera will actually focus on me again. I don't know what happened here, folks, and I apologize for that. But anyway, let's kick off today's webinar, which is Your Data Has Moved to the Cloud as Your Security Stack. Our speakers today are Jack Miller, who is the head of global professional services at Menlo Security, and Mitchell Ashley, who is the CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right. All right. Well, I know I'm so excited about this conversation, but before we get things kicked off, I thought it would be great if you guys could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience, your history, and that way that'll help set the stage for the conversation. Jack, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Charlene. As Charlene mentioned, I head up professional services currently for Menlo Security. I've been here for going on a year and a half right now. But before that, I spent pretty much my entire career on the practitioner side, in the trenches. Most of that as a CISO. I worked 16 years as a CISO for 4 large enterprises. So, I have the opportunity here that I've experienced the challenges. I've suffered the pain of this battle that never seems to end. And eventually, I have a lot of people always ask me, well, why would you leave being a CISO to go over and work for a startup? And at the end of the day, and I think everyone on the call should relate to this, it was just really frustration, right? After so many years of it felt like the movie Groundhog's Day with Bill Murray, where you get up and you go to work and it's like the same day as the day before, having the same conversations and fighting the same battles and having tools that are insufficient. And so, I thought, well, if I move to the startup world, maybe I can bring some of my knowledge and understanding of what the actual problem is, as opposed to what they think it is in the lab, and help close that gap. And here I am today. Thank you for having me.
Very good, and good to be on with you, Jack. My name is Mitch Ashley, and I'm CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, which is an analyst firm that focuses on cybersecurity, also cloud native applications, digital transformation, DevOps, how we create software, things like that. And in a sort of a different way, I too kind of made the transition from practitioner, and I've created products in my past too, but also been a practitioner for a lot of my career, both in security and also software and IT and cloud and things like that. And so I've moved over and begun in the analyst side of things. And one of the reasons, probably like you, Jack, is that you do get a chance to work with a lot of different companies and both share what you've experienced, but also learn. I think we learn just as much in our roles today as we probably did as a practitioner. I'm guessing you might agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you get to interact with so many different companies and so many different things, right? But I think the value, right, for you or for me with that mixed background is that we have a different filter when we experience that with all these different customers, right? And we see it different. And that was, I heading professional services. I've never headed professional services for a startup company before, right? I've ran operations and a few other things, but so how did this role work for me? Well, I spent a whole lot of money in my career, and I implemented a whole lot of products and was on the receiving side of lots of deployments. And unfortunately, they were all more difficult than they had to be, right? And this, Mitch, from your experience, right? And it's there's that disconnect. Most vendors don't understand the real world challenges that you have as a practitioner, right? They think that in the security space, that security rules everything, and you're just going to lock this down, and it doesn't matter if it impacts your users, because everything has to be secure, and you're just going to tell them, well, tough, right? And I don't. We have a couple customers that work that way, that have three-letter initials for their name, but for the majority of companies out there, it doesn't work that way, right? And you turn one knob too far, and you cause user impact for the wrong person, and what happens? It sets you back 6 months or even 2 years in what you've been trying to do, right? So it's it's that. I think it's that seeing both sides, right, is what gives us an interesting perspective.
That's the dilemma. I kind of think of security as like hockey. We're going to play this game on ice, but we don't want anybody to fall. Right? So, like, how's that going to happen? And it definitely is a challenge. I'd really love to hear from you.
To that point, Mitch, right? Yeah. It's unrealistic expectations, right? They get put on the CIO and the CTO and the CISO of how they're going to make everything secure without causing user impact, right? Everybody wants a magic pill, right? The magic pill doesn't exist, right? It's hard. It takes hard work. There's going to be user impact. I don't know. I think the holy grail from my perspective, and one of the reasons I came to Menlo is, search for the types of technology that you could put in and you could protect users for how users are going to be. Right? Where, the more transparent it can be, the less it impacts the users, the less they know it's there, the less you have to rely on training them to understand what's good or bad. Right. But unfortunately, what I'm describing isn't a simple thing to create. Right.
Yeah. At the risk of getting all the hate mail from our webinar, I'm very counter end user training. Yes, we need to do it. We're not going to solve this problem by just teaching people not to click on links in emails, which is going to happen anyway, and some of them need to happen. I'm curious, Jack. Now you've been, and I've kind of been in and out of product and practitioner roles in this 16-year period. You mentioned that you've been a CISO. We're talking about pretty huge changes that have happened. If 16 years ago would have been, mid to late 80s, we had the 2008 downturn, lots. And of course, we have our own financial and economic impact today from COVID, not to speak of the personal tragedy part of it. How would you describe where we've come from and where we are, that 16-year journey that you were on as a CISO? How did it change over that period of time?
Yeah, boy. And I guess to quote the Dead, what a long, strange journey it's been, right? But yeah, I mean, my first CISO job was with the County of Orange in Southern California, right? So the County of Orange was I think it's the second largest county in California, and it's the fifth largest county in the country. We had 18,000 employees, 40 different departments. You can imagine the kinds of services that a county government provides, right? It's the sheriff's department with 911 dispatch. It's social services, right? To protect kids that need help. It's healthcare. It's so many different critical services that the constituents really rely on. And but going back to the changes, right? Going back to when I first started, I mean the good old days, right? Where being a CISO was about governance, and you got to sit in the ivory glass tower with all the executives and issue edicts, right? Thou shall not do this, thou will do this. Hey, Mr. IT, you're going to make sure you patch all your systems immediately, right? And then, when stuff would happen, you were kind of had this kind of Teflon because you didn't own anything, right? And you could sit back and kind of say, well, hey, look, Mitch was the CTO. I told him he had to patch these things, right? He just didn't do what I told him to do. And, Mitch is sitting there thinking, okay, but you told me to patch stuff that if I patch it, it's going to break all of our applications, right? And so there was a huge disconnect, and things weren't getting done because I feel the CISOs didn't really understand the impact to the organization of the things they were proposing, because it didn't directly affect them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, a lot of CEOs got very frustrated because when there would be a breach, when there would be an incident, you'd end up with all this finger pointing, right? Well, I told them. Well, what they told me to do was impossible. And, they wanted one throat to choke. So we saw this evolution to CISOs taking over security operations as well. And I think in a lot of ways that was really a game changer. It made the job much more difficult. It made the job much more accountable. It made the job much more 24/7, because now it was your team that was responding to things. But I think that was a huge change. I think we've seen, there's obviously significantly more appreciation and understanding today for the need for security, right? And that permeates the entire society. So that flows into the boardrooms, right? And then it flows down from the executives. So, clearly there's much more budget allocated. There's much more lip service to it. But at the end of the day, right, we all have to remember that organizations don't exist to be secure, right? They exist to make a profit. They exist to provide a service, right? Maybe not make a profit, but provide a service. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. And if security starts impacting their ability to do those two things, right, except for those three-letter agencies I talked about and organizations like that,
Mm-hmm.
for every other organization out there, no matter how much they value security and how much they prioritize it and how much they're willing to budget for it, right, it quickly stops when the real world impact of an outage today versus the theoretical incident of the theoretical impact of an incident down the road, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are a couple of the big things that I've seen change. Unfortunately, on the flip side, right, I would say, and we talked about this before briefly, what I've always seen is probably the biggest challenge for myself as a CISO and every other CISO out there, biggest risk to organizations is staffing. And it's as a CISO, I don't know if you're the captain, right? I don't know if you're the quarterback, right? I mean, I guess you can pick your position, right? Maybe I like to call it maybe more the conductor. And at the end of the day, you need to build a really strong team, and you need to train them and retain them. And if you can't, right, that's when problems happen. And that's still the same problem today we were having 20 years ago, which is definitely frustrating.
So Jack, I have a quick question. I apologize, Mitch. I don't mean to tread right over you there, but it sounds like in your experience that the role has actually evolved to be a lot more hands-on. As part of that, though, are you having the conversations with, or were you having the conversations with other folks within your organization more at that kind of lower practitioner level when you were making the decisions regarding security, regarding where the data is going to be stored, and all of the kind of controls around that data? Is that something that has kind of changed as the the infrastructure and the governance controls and all of those other regulatory issues come to mind?
Mm-hmm.
Are we getting more people involved in the conversation? And if so, is that what needs to happen?
Yeah, I think, look, if we look back, right, to say the 90s and early 2000s, we had this big explosion in technology, but we didn't have technical management, right? There were very few people that could come from the old defense contractors, right, and assume those roles. And so, it was you had managers in the technology organizations, often up to including the CIO, who didn't really understand technology. And what would happen is you would get vendors in there, and the vendors would design their network for them, right? Because it was what was best for the vendor. And you would get IT people that maybe didn't really understand the technology, how it worked, right? They were maybe more, and Mitch, I'll get maybe more comments back than you on training, and what you said on training, and we can go back to that. But But a lot of them didn't really fundamentally understand what they were doing. They were maybe more kind of operators, right, than builders. And as an engineer, for me, I always need to understand things. So while I consider myself technical, I mean, I'm not technical like the people that I have working for me, but technical enough to be able to understand it. Because if I don't understand it, how am I going to go and fight for it and argue for it and make the case and set the right expectations of really what we're providing and what we're not providing and what the impacts are going to be. And so, over the years, just like we've seen security people in the trenches move up into the CISO role. So now we have CISOs coming along today that are much more technical and knowledgeable than they were, 20 years ago. Right, we're seeing the same thing throughout the IT organization, right? So in all areas, up to the CISO, the CIO, up to the CTO. So it's making the conversations a lot more technical. But everybody always says, well, you've got to focus on the business. It's about the business, and I think the people still focus on the business, but they realize that it's the devil in the details. And
right.
so yeah, I think the conversations have broadened a lot more. There are a lot more resources that can come in. People are less reticent to just accept a bunch of acronyms that someone whips out as the answer to your problem, like they were 20 years ago.
Oh, Jack, here's how I would describe it is we came from an era of point solution. We bought boxes to solve specific problems, VPNs and intrusion prevention or detection, whatever, the long list of stuff, which was mostly about protecting the network. And in some cases, you remember host intrusion prevention, right? That was sort of as far as we got into anything close to the application or the software infrastructure. Today, we have to protect it all, and it's all software. Maybe some hardware too. I mean, there is hardware there, maybe some specialized boxes, but not very many. And to me, the sort of technical landscape of the CISO, the security engineer, now you need to know about data. And you need to know about data privacy. You need to know about data access controls and all the permissions and API security and things about getting to data. You need to know about things like containers and software architecture. And you have to be an expert at it, but you can't just sort of wrap it in cellophane and say, this is now protected because we, put some nice Reynolds wrap around it or whatever you use. And that's the challenge. So you can't go to a vendor today and say, I want to buy a point solution for this, this, and this. And if I meet my checklist, I'm doing sort of best practices. Now you have to step back and say, okay, well, what are the ways we're going to protect all of that stuff from the inside out and the outside in? And it's a much different world, a much more challenging world. On top of that, we've evolved from sort of the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Security, we'll leave it alone until, something bad happens and then we'll deal with it and the rest of the organization will hear about it. To today, there's two kinds of organizations, those that have been breached and those that just don't talk about that they've been breached, right? It is a fact of life and all the way to the boardroom and back, right? It is now security is part of the business. Conversation, right? I mean, you agree with where I'm coming from, man?
Yeah, 100%. It's funny, the last part. I made some notes because you mentioned some really good points, right? I want to touch on, but the last thing you said about those who have been breached and those who don't know they've been breached. I gave a webinar in Australia. I think it was last week or the week before, and had some statistics. And there was something like, 75%. Of the CISOs that responded said that that they know their organization will be attacked with ransomware this year. And when I was giving the webinar, I said, I guess 25% or whatever the delta was has already been compromised or something, right? Or they have their head buried in the sand, right? I mean, it's 100%, right? We're all getting attacked. We're all getting attacked all the time. And I think, that you brought up some really interesting points, right? And so you talked about networking. My background was from networking, and traditionally, most security people came up through networking, right? It was kind of this path, right? You ended up you're working on the network. From that, you moved over to the firewalls, and from the firewalls, then you transitioned to the security team, and that was great. To be good at networking, you have to think very logically, right? It's like plumbing. There's a reason why things flow the way they flow. But I know later on in my career, I was always searching to try to hire people that came from a background in applications or came from a background in databases, because the security issues there, I mean, especially when you start talking about applications and how applications work, and it's very different than a network perspective. And so, the people on this webinar today, right? I think there's a lot of developers. For developers that are on this webinar today, I mean, for them to be able to say, look, I want to use this background and transition over into security. I mean, they would be invaluable, because they would bring just a knowledge and a skill set to the table that security teams are lacking and just starving for today.
I totally agree. I used to say security people need to learn about software architecture. I think security people need to hire software people, sort of be their own equivalent of, site reliability engineers. But now you hear about terms like security automation engineer, right? There are software people who are going in security for security, but also to help automate some of this. So let me throw this out and challenge us both, or challenge our audience. I think we're at the risk of applying this same point solution approach to data that we used to do with networks. And by that, I mean, it isn't just that your data is in the cloud. Your data is in multiple clouds. Some of it's SaaS services, Dropbox, whatever, Office 365, Google. Some of it is in S3 storage. Some of it is in databases that are run by, a service provider in the cloud, or your own, your own database that you're managing. You've got data that is being created at the edge by industrial IoT devices, end user device. It is everywhere. So you're not going to find one thing one product that's going to solve it all. You've got to take different kinds of approach. We hear a lot about sort of zero trust, and that's ill-defined, I think, today. But and one of the things that's really popular, I think, because for a reason, are things like isolation and segmentation, and start to contain in a more kind of logical way versus a physical way. How we think about securing that data. So you tell me if I'm full of hooey, or you think that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right on, right? At the end of the day, it's always about, where's the data flowing? How's the data flowing, right? Who's accessing the data? How are they accessing the data, and where are they accessing it from, right? And, going back to your comment about the point solutions, right? And so there's some baggage. And it's really legitimate baggage that security practitioners and IT practitioners carry from their experience, right? And one of those big bags, right? And I buy into it 100%, was that if you wanted good security, you had to go with the point solution, because we've had this debate for so many years. Wouldn't it be better if we could just buy the suite that has everything in it, right? One integrated solution versus having to manage 10 different point solutions. But we all know from our experience over the years that the integrated suite was first created by acquisitions of other companies. So when you got into it, it really turned out it wasn't that integrated, and you have to flip over to different management consoles anyway, right?
I have no idea what you're talking about, Eddie. Foreign concept to me.
Well, and for two, then you get, let's say that sandboxing, right? It's kind of a clear, easy technology to talk about, right? When FireEye came out with sandboxing, right, it was a point solution. Very quickly, other AV vendors started offering their sandbox solution, but it takes some time for the followers to catch up to the leaders, right, from a technical perspective. So they're all coming out saying, well, look, you can take this out and you can put in our solution. It's already covered in your license. But then you're getting a product that maybe works at 50% of the ability of what the true leader in the space works at, right? So if I'm going to implement a product, do I want to implement a product that's the leader in the space, or do I want to implement a product that's gets me halfway there, right? So we've still been fighting that, and that's the baggage we bring to it. I think it's much more complicated today, though, because the need for that integrated solution or the requirement for the integrated solution, I think, has really evolved over what it was before. Because when it was in the data center, right, when it was network based, we could put 10 different appliances in the path, right, and everything does its function as the data goes in and out. We can't really do that in the cloud, right? So it really is driving us to have to get to that integrated type solution, which ultimately should make things easier.
So to your point, Jack, we have been having this conversation, do you want to go best of breed, or do you want to go with the ease of an integrated solution? And there have been arguments for and against it, and all of them are very, very valid. Mm-hmm. But does this change in the era of the cloud when you have certain vendors whose technology works better on premises than it does with cloud solutions? Or does that dynamic change when you're talking about what type of security solutions you want to implement for your organization that's going to work best regardless of where your data resides? Has that kind of been spun on its head?
Yeah, I mean, totally, right? I mean, it's this whole new space of SASE, right? Is bringing all of that together, right? So bringing all of those security controls and the security stack in together, and bringing in the networking side of it as well, right? With traffic steering and shaping and optimization and all those types of things. And so it is a convergence. And how do you manage your environment today when your environment and your users and your data are ubiquitous? Right. If you've got 5 different things that has to interact with their traffic, if you don't have all those consolidated in one place, right, your users are going to have a terrible experience, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. So it really is driving the necessity, and eventually we may end up in a situation where we've gone too far, and we get to the point where we're so reliant on some companies to provide all of the security that a breakdown could really be catastrophic over what it would have been before. I mean, that's another advantage. You got separate, best in breed point solutions, and one of them gets compromised or one of them gets taken down, right? You still have the other stuff protecting you there. Now you got an integrated solution, right? You're putting a lot more eggs in one basket at the same time.
It's very true. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, it also seems like the other paradigm that we can easily get stuck in is, once we have it figured out and implemented, we'll be good. It's never done. And we talk about acquiring technology as on the product side. Companies do that themselves, right? I mean, now all of a sudden you got 5 different solutions for everything because you've rolled up 5 different companies over the last 3 years or whatever it might be. Yeah. So it's I think you have to assume that it is not a solution or a suite. Mm-hmm. It's sort of a strategy with a platform, a set of platforms that you can start to interconnect, and more about how do you think about protecting these things, and how can different products or services help you accomplish that? Because I might acquire somebody who's using great Menlo products, and I've built some good things around that. Just to reference your company, we're not doing a commercial for Menlo, but and I acquire someone else who doesn't do that. Well, I want to take the things that mesh and take advantage of where I've invested, but also maybe take some best of breed over from one, vice versa. It's just a fluid. It's a fluid, not a solid. Is what I like to say. Think about it, if that makes sense.
There's also, for a great number of organizations that, simply don't have IT staff or the right amount of IT staff to manage this. I've been hearing a lot more about managed security services providers, the MSSPs. They've been around for a long time, but especially over the last 12 to 15 months or so, been hearing a lot more about that. And I wonder, are you seeing kind of those guys kind of have a seat at the table more often in more organizations as far as the decision making around the best approach to security for these organizations, especially those that have this kind of hybrid environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So look, first thing, I have some. I went through a personal journey with respect to MSSPs, right? So let me kind of quickly share it, right? After we migrated over to owning operations, right, and now you have to build out a security operations center, right, and the staffing challenge that we talked about. But before I get to the staffing challenge, I had someone reach out to me, a salesperson that I knew from another company, and they were working for an MSSP, and we got together and we talked, and I said, look, I don't really, and coming from a decentralized organization, right, having worked in a few large government organizations that were decentralized, right, where everybody ran their own stuff, and we were trying to watch and hold them accountable and making sure they were doing the right things, and saw a lot of the pain of how that didn't work well. And so, outsourcing stuff to an MSSP was something that not only was I resistant to, but it didn't make a lot of sense. Because historically, those conversations were around monitoring, right, for the security operations center. And the question I would always have was, okay, so help me understand. My system is automated, and it's going to send an alert. So it can send an alert directly to my people, or it can send an alert to your people who can then send the alert to my people. Either way, you don't have access into my stuff. You don't have admin access. You can't get to all the different data. You can't do the triage. You can't do the analysis. So we end up doing the job anyway. So what have you really bought me? And I did a large SIM implementation and hired some really good people and got them a lot of training, and we built a whole lot of great content, and we were rocking and rolling. And Mitch, this also kind of ties into your point. And then somebody left. Right, my content person left, and suddenly it was like, okay, this is not good, right? Where are we going to find someone else who can do this? Because we can go from a good state to a bad state really, really quickly if it's not maintained. And at that point, I kind of had an epiphany, and I realized where it is that MSSPs fit in and how we need to use them and how they can be so valuable. And it ties back to the staffing issue, because if I have one person leave, right, how big is my bench of people that I have? Whereas if I do have an MSSP that does understand my environment, right, and they have a person leave, they have more people. And it's easier also for MSSPs to hire and retain people, because there's a lot of reasons why people would want to stay there and grow with that, and the opportunities for what it could mean for them from a career versus, just chugging your way up the corporate ladder at some enterprise in the United States or elsewhere in the world. So I kind of went through a journey, and I got to the point. I went to what I felt was great, the compromise, a hybrid, right? Is you outsource the stuff, but you make sure you have the expertise on your team to be able to closely monitor the people you're outsourcing to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Because I also had experiences further back in my career with MSSPs that you would never ever get a call from, and I don't think it was because there was nothing ever going on, right? So it has morphed. What we're finding now is that there's even more demand, right? We're having customers ask us, right? Well, is there an MSSP that can implement and manage your solution for us? And we're actually working with a number of partners right now to develop those programs. So I think that's a good thing. I think at some point we need to make this change that company X is in business to do X, right? This security company is in business to do security, right? So let's leverage the experts where we can and just oversee them to make sure they're doing it right, as opposed to continually trying to build out the A team in every company out there, which then we're all just fighting against each other and we're stealing resources from each other.
I feel like I'm listening to Loggins and Messina, twin sons from different mothers or whatever that album was called. Like a little nostalgic here.
Showing your age, Mitch.
I know, yeah. Well, I do every day, so I might as well here.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm a kidder.
I've come to similar conclusions, maybe from a different path, Jack, and that is, I think we outsourced we took an outsourcing approach to push the problem away. Let's give it the problem to somebody else who does this for a living, and we'll just let them worry about it.
Yeah.
And as you said, that works great until they need to call somebody who actually knows what the next step in the process is.
Right.
And the real sort of conclusion I have is this: it's a staffing and a skills issue. And now I think the next evolution of that is your MSP approach has to also fit into your entire security strategy. And there's compliance and data and operational parts of all of that. And automation too, which is, I brought that up, I think earlier. I think that's a big thing for us right now, is relying more heavily on automation, because the environment is changing so much faster thanks to DevOps and automation and containerized and different software architectures. We have to think about it the same way in our security approach with that. So it isn't managed service providers are good or bad. It's part of a necessary approach you might need to take, especially if you're in that mid-sized company. That's the folks that my heart goes out to, because mid-sized companies, medium, tend to have almost all, if not the same, requirements put upon their security teams or asked of their security teams as an enterprise, but the resources just marginally larger than a small company. It is a tough space to be in, and that's a great place for MS.
Yeah.
And do you think because of that, that's actually kind of held organizations back from making some of the changes, infrastructure changes that maybe they should be doing, because they recognize that it's a different security conversation. Our guys and gals don't have that level of knowledge right now, and it would be too difficult and too just upsetting, if you will, to make some of those changes that they really do need to change, especially when we're talking about digitally transforming their organizations. Is that what's holding them back?
Let me put my analyst hat on just for a minute.
You do that.
Jump in. So,
Oh, not the analyst hat.
Oh no, here we go.
Not the pointy hat, the analyst hat. I don't know.
It's very pointy. So
the green shade, right? We've done research in a number of different areas, and one of the consistent themes, whether it's cloud or security or software architectures, the skill gap is massive. It's huge. That's one of the biggest barriers of we want to, and we're being driven to make software part of our key strategy that's going to enable the company. Well, where do we find people who know cloud native? Where do we find people who know how to secure dynamic software infrastructure, more or less operate across 3 different clouds? And that, again, to your question, Charlene, about MSPs, that's one of the ways you can help kind of leapfrog, get a jump on it.
Right.
Maybe you're building that expertise internally. Maybe you're not, because of your size.
Yeah.
By the way, that's another limitation you have too, Jack. In a kind of medium-sized company, what is the career path for a security person when there's a 3-person team or 5-person? That's all part of this mix of how do we protect the data?
Yeah, I mean, even a 15 or 20-person team, right? I mean, and I got to that point, right? And that played into my decisions too. It was right. Okay, well, where do I go next? Do I want to go from 20,000 users to 100,000 users? And it was interesting. I had a conversation one time with a top VC in the Bay Area, and we were talking, and he said, "Look, I like to meet with people like you more, who are CISOs at 10, 20,000 person organizations, 5,000, 30,000, whatever it was, as opposed to the ones that are CISOs at 200,000 person or 100,000 person organizations, because they get so removed from it because their organizations have become so large, right? And so I would say being a CISO, right, that mid-sized organization is probably in a lot of ways the best place you can be, because you get to still be, you're not hands-on, but you get to still have the time to dig into the technology, to fully understand it, so you can make much more informed decisions. But to your point, it's really, really hard to compete when you're hiring, when you work for a company that's got 20,000 employees versus a company that's got 100,000 employees, right? They are able to pay much more money. You come in and you work in an organization that's got 1,000 people in it. There's tons of career opportunities and growth opportunities while you're there, right? So it's tricky, right? But I think Charlene, you kind of touched on it, and Mitch, you touched on it earlier, right? The word strategy, I think, is a really interesting word. And quite frankly, since I've been in this industry, which is obviously a lot longer than I would ever thought I was going to talk about being in an industry, we haven't been strategic enough, right? We've always been reactive. It's on the IT side, you're reacting to a new business requirement that has to be done immediately because they're going after a new market, right? Or they're merging with a new company or whatever that might be. And on the security side, right, you're continually scrambling to try to figure out, okay, well, you're going down this path. How am I going to secure this path, right? And that was why digital transformation, right? For so many years, we heard people talk about digital transformation, and from my perspective, I think, and Mitch, you would know more as an analyst, it seemed like pre-COVID, it was a relatively slow adoption for digital transformation, right? It was networking teams that had a lot of expensive MPLS circuits and bandwidth issues that were saying, look, I don't want to keep backhauling all my traffic. I want to be able to put in a DSL, an internet circuit, and let these people go directly to the internet, right? And then obviously we had to start scrambling on that, but then COVID came along, and that kind of shifted everything, right? But it's really hard to be strategic. It's really hard to be strategic in this space because you don't have enough staff. And when you don't have enough staff, everybody's kind of buried, they're kind of overworked, and that makes them be very tactical. And I always said, right, when I was a CISO, I always said that it was very much, I called it battlefield triage, right? I came from the military many years ago, and it was battlefield triage, right? When you're out there on the battlefield and they're doing triage in the tent, right? Somebody comes in and they've got a gunshot in their arm, right? They're tying a tourniquet to save the person's life. They're not necessarily right off the bat. I don't know. I grew up on MASH, right? We remember
right.
how when they're bringing the choppers in on MASH, right? And it was like, okay, cut this person's leg off. Let's move over to this person now because we have to save their lives. And security is the same kind of way, right? You've got a huge gap and you're bleeding out over here. So I just need to close that gap. I don't need to close the gap so it's a higher level of security than the entire rest of my organization, because I'm probably not being effective with my resources, right? So I'm going to close the gap down to kind of where everything else is, right? And I don't know, there's so many analogies. You could compare it to the spinning plates. I'm not going to get one plate perfect. I have to keep moving back and forth and getting all the plates spinning. And so it's really, really hard to be strategic when you're operating in that kind of fashion.
So do you think that we're going to become more strategic? And sorry, Mitch, I keep just cutting in on you. Sorry,
it's the
New Yorker in me.
It's
So
okay.
it's the New Yorker in me. I just got to cut right in. So as we do, as organizations become more strategic, do you think that those conversations are going to be led with, well, I guess I should say, is security going to lead the conversation, or is operations or infrastructure going to be leading that conversation? I mean, what's going to drive it moving forward, do you think?
So let me jump in here.
Yeah,
since I lived in New York for a while, I'll jump in.
Hey, I went to college in New York too, so we're all
so we all have some heritage there.
Yeah.
So I think we have to get away from being mechanical engineers building moats and walls, right? That's sort of the problem-solving mode.
Yeah.
To think about let's learn from the software world. What's happened in software? Software has moved from we write code, we build applications, to everything is code, and we're all about being agile, and also building. Being agile and creating reliable solutions that we know can pivot and change very quickly. So instead of thinking about, I have to figure out how to protect S3, I have to figure out how to protect data over in this database, and I have to think about this. Let's stop for a moment and say, our data lives everywhere. It's in apps, it's through the browser, it's through devices that people have. It's in cloud storage. So let's assume that that's going to continue. It's going to be in more places, more new, different kinds of technologies, new uses than it is today, rather than fewer. We can't constrain it anymore. We can't pull the drawbridge in and okay, if we could just get control over it, we'll be okay. No, it's going to flourish with or without us. We want it to do it to securely. So if you think about it that way, it forces you into a strategic mindset rather than a tactical. Yes, you have tactical issues, but you think about prevention as well as response, right? We have to have equally as fantastic incident response mechanisms on a small and a large scale as we do prevention on a small and a large scale. So think about what are the ways, what are the approaches we want to take to managing our data, understanding it's going to appear without us necessarily knowing, and then we're going to want to go apply those same principles or approaches in the future. So
yeah, no,
my advice.
Yeah, no, I totally right on. I mean, I think, there was always this issue, right, of this dichotomy, right? I spent most of my career in security in Southern California, right? So for many years, right? And I know all the people there very well. And there was always this, going back historically, there were, for lack of a better word, the rich companies and the poor companies, right? And maybe the companies weren't rich or poor, right? Maybe it was the rich CISOs versus the poor CISOs, right? The ones that had a budget and could buy stuff and could hire people, and the ones that had to try to bootstrap everything, right? And so there was a disconnect, and obviously that created a situation where some companies were able to be more secure than other companies. Now I think with the migration to SaaS apps, right? So we talk about MSSPs, right? And we look at it from the network side and we look at it from the security side. But really, a SaaS app is kind of the equivalent of an MSSP for your applications, if you will, right? You're not hosting it, you're not supporting it, you have a vendor doing that for you. So we're outsourcing a lot of the traditional IT work that IT organizations did. So I think Mitch, to your point, we have an opportunity right now where we're going to have a new paradigm. Instead of the rich and the poor, we're going to have the companies that say, okay, look, I've outsourced all of this stuff so I can eliminate my staff. And then we're going to have the companies that say, okay, I've outsourced all of my stuff, so now my staff can be more strategic and can be ahead of things and can be effectively monitoring and managing all these vendors and suppliers that we have, right? And that's where we're going to see the disconnect. And for people that embrace it the right way, and don't say, hey, money saving opportunity, everyone's got to go, and they keep their resources, but they shift their focus. I think that's where we have a big path forward.
We have a question that's come in. Rupesh asks, and I think this is a question that a lot of people are kind of grappling with. He's basically asking, is it really safe to store your data on the cloud? And we've been having this question for many years, and especially if you consider the security breaches that have been making headlines of late, and the software supply chain attacks that have come through, is it really secure to have your data stored on the cloud? What do you think, Jack?
Yeah, so Rupesh, that's a great question. I think, look, the answer is that we can't say that there's anywhere that you put your data and it's safe. We can say that probably anywhere you put your data, it cannot be safe, right? That's easy to say. But we can't just say, yeah, moving your data to the cloud is safe. There's too many other factors that come into play, right? How you're moving your data to the cloud, what are the controls that you're implementing, what's the companies that you're using in the cloud, right, that come into play. But we have seen over the last 5 years, 6 years, a lot of advances in technologies that really allow us to start to take away, when things first moved to SaaS apps or infrastructure as a service or whatever it was, right? We had these providers take a little bit too much control, because we didn't have the tools to be able to influence or exert control over the provider. And I think now that's changed. We have better technologies. For instance, right, things like polymorphic encryption, right? So today, in the past, if I had if I was doing database as a service, right, from an infrastructure provider, right, everyone there that had admin access to that database, right, an SA account or anything else, could get to all of my data. And now with things like polymorphic encryption, right, I can encrypt the data. Now the provider can manage the system, can still run the queries and do all those types of things they have to do, but they don't have access to the data. They can't view the data, right? And I know that sounds a little bit far-fetched and out there, that, well, how could we actually do this, right? But I mean, I guess the good news is, because the problem got so bad, we got probably some of the smartest people in the world, right, have been focusing on how to fix this problem, and they are coming up with some really great technologies. The challenge is, how do we get those technologies out into people's hands and do it in a way that doesn't cause user impact? But I guess a really long answer to the question. I think it can be safe it can be safe as safe can be, right? Let me say it that way. There's always the fine print. Nothing's ever going to be a guarantee, but it can be every bit as safe, or not safer, than it would be keeping it in your own internal organization if you have the right oversight and controls in place. Definitely.
I would say it's an extremely valid question. We've been answering it since the idea of the cloud came up. Originally, that was an objection that usually won over why you should or not go to the cloud.
It was interesting, though. That was never an objection back in the ASP days.
Yeah. My gosh, you're right. I don't think people really understood the technology then, but yeah, that's a really good point.
To me, it's kind of like asking, well, if we can travel in a plane and get there faster, but it's safer in a car, shouldn't we take a car? Well, no, there's, we've reached a point where there's a level of safety in the cloud. Mm-hmm. There's a level of safety of in our own private data center. Now it's just as equally to screw it up and lose the keys to the kingdom in any of those environments. Anytime that you're going to a service, you're talking about a shared risk model, right? But whether that service is someone supplying software to you, could have a bug in it, or supply chain issue, or a service that's a cloud provider or security provider, product, MSP, et cetera. So to me, what I hear is rarely is going to the cloud security a preventer of that happening. I mean, there are certain kinds of things, yes. I mean, we're talking about three-letter organizations and other things, state secrets, et cetera. But today, it is on a fairly equal footing, but just you have to take different measures in different environments. I mean, and that's also part of the challenge, is how do I secure an Amazon environment versus a Google versus a alternative cloud provider versus an app. And a lot of stuff that we're doing today requires so much integration across services for our applications. Is your stuff flowing into Zapier? Secure, that you're using to tie together your productivity apps or whatever it might be. It's more complex. Yeah, but it's the world we're in, and there are ways of securing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think look, there was a lot of truth to the old adage that how did the story go? Something about a bear in the woods, and all you've got to do is run faster than the person next to you, right? And that was really the truth in security for two reasons. One was that, well, if the other person falls, the bear's going to focus on them, right? So if I'm more secure than my peers, then people are just going to go after my peers because it's easier, right? So there's a lot of validity to that. The other part that comes in as well, I remember doing a large project one time for tokenization for PCI. And we were looking at the different providers to do it. And the solution was really simple to me, to go with the largest data processor in the world's tokenization solution, because they were already our processor. And the reality was that if they had a breach, right? So this is this kind of new thing with the cloud, right? If Salesforce has a breach, look how many companies that's impacting. So while I may not be running faster than the other companies, right, that whole issue of customers coming back and saying, you didn't protect my data, I'm not going to be your customer anymore. It's like, okay, well, look, this impacted everybody, right? There's a sense that maybe it was beyond your control, that this is bigger, and there's a lot, maybe less of that attribution back to the specific company that your information was compromised from, because it was going to get compromised wherever it was at, right? I mean, we can go back and we can look at past breaches. What was the big one where the people were selling everyone's data?
Like Target or something.
Take your pick.
Right. I mean, well, no.
Home Depot, I think.
It went to Congress, right? Where they were harvesting all the data and they were legally selling it, right? But there were so many companies that impacted, right? How much blowback was there to any individual company? So, that's an advantage too, right? Peer pressure, everybody's doing it. Well, mom, they did, so I can.
Right.
I mean, in some ways that kind of pays off, right? Moving to the cloud, right? It's now we all just need to focus our attention on those providers to make sure they're doing what they need to do.
So I don't mean to, once again, Mitch, I apologize.
I'm going to interrupt you this time just so I win one of these.
Okay.
All I was gonna say is there's sort of the, it happens to everybody, the yeah, but approach, right?
Yeah.
There's also the flip it on its head. Breaches happen, data loss happens. We don't want it to happen. It is going to occur. I promise you, it has already happened, whether you want to admit it or not. It's a matter of what is our response and what is our measures that we take on that half of the strategy. It's not just about prevention. That's what I would say. So
yeah. And Charlie, I'm going to hop in really quick. You
guys are killing me here.
No. But look, I want to give a quick plug before we wrap this up for isolation, right? And this isn't a plug for Menlo. Now, Menlo was a pioneer and we've been doing it for a long time, but there's 18 companies out there today that offer remote browser isolation as part of their solution, right? If you're not doing remote browser isolation today, then you're not doing what you need to be doing, right? Because to your point, Mitch, it's the one area, and maybe there's going to be websites that don't work, and I can't isolate everything, or there's business partners where it's not worth the risk of the impact, or whatever that might be. But for every site that you can isolate, you're able to effectively eliminate 100% of the malware risk and potentially phishing risk if you isolate read-only for that site. And there's not many areas in security where you can say, look, here's a risk I can take off the table, right? Maybe it's only with this scope I can take it off the table, but you can take it off the table. And so, the one plug I would give to everybody before we wrap up here is that as you're migrating your controls to the cloud, right? Because you have to, because they can't be in the data center anymore. It has to be in a central point in the cloud, right? It's an opportunity to refresh your legacy controls and implement some of the newer technologies that have been developed that can really make a difference over what we had before. Things like isolation are a big part of that. And I would stress everybody to make sure you build that into your roadmap.
All right. Well, so what I was going to say was that we only had a couple minutes left, so we need to start wrapping things up. So, but yeah, we're 2 minutes to the top of the hour. So at this point, we are going to have to close out the conversation. What a great conversation. And, we got some great comments from the audience too. So do want to thank you guys for a great conversation. Before we close things out though, just a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. Following the webinar today, we are going to be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the Security Boulevard website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. All right, before we kick things or wrap things up, let's do the 4 Amazon gift card winners. So 4 winners for the $25 Amazon gift cards. First winner today is Brian S. Congratulations, Brian. Our second, and Jack, please feel free to give us a drum roll here. Our second winner today is Linda G. Congratulations, Linda. Our third winner today is Doug L. Congratulations, Doug. And our fourth and final winner today is Martin C. Congratulations, Martin.
Yeah.
We'll be following up. Yay! We'll be following up with all 4 of you guys by email offline to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And of course, if you don't see it there, please check your spam folder. Mitch and Jack, great conversation. I love having this with you guys. So we should do this again soon. Hopefully.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Charlene.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
yeah, it was great. I also want to thank the audience for being such a great audience. So many great chats and suggestions, questions, etc. So thank you all for being a part of today's webinar. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon for now, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please, whatever you do, stay safe.